Welcome to Calvary Baptist Church, Idaho Falls, where we seek to glorify God, make disciples, and take the gospel to the nations. For more information about our church, please visit www.calvaryidahofalls.org.
There are multiple sites online that claim that for a fee, you can name a star. Now, not wanting to ruin somebody's Mother's Day gift this morning, I hope not, but these are kind of a scam. But if you go to starregistry.com, you can get the deluxe star kit for $34.99. You can name a star and you get all these certificates and maps and all of these kind of official looking stuff that they will send to you. If that's not expensive enough for you, you can get the supernova star kit. Those are the really bright stars. You can name one of those for $79. If that's a little too rich for your blood, you can get the twin star kit, so you can name two stars that are really close together for $59.99. But the problem is these sites are not recognized by any world body and not by any kind of astrologers or associations or anything like that. The International Astronomical Union is the one who actually does name stars, and you can't pay them any money. The only way you get your name on a star is if you discover one, okay? So I hope I didn't ruin anybody's Mother's Day gift this morning. But if they did, it's a really nice certificate, I promise. It looks really good. But I think about this, right? What height of self-centered arrogance do we have that we think that we can name something millions of light years away as if it's ours? Something that God put in the sky, something you'll never touch, something you'll never come close to, right? But over 2,000 years ago, a new star did appear. And it was set in motion by the sovereign hand of the most holy God to announce the birth of the Messiah, the eternal King, Jesus Christ. So our text this morning from Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12 speaks of this. Let's look at it this morning. Matthew chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it arose, and have come to worship him.' When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. And assembling all of the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, 'In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.' Then Herod summoned the wise men and secretly ascertained from them what time the star had appeared, and sent them to Bethlehem, saying, 'Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word, that I too may come and worship him.' After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it arose went before them until it came over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold and of frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way." So Matthew writes this account this morning for us to answer one crucial question. Who is the legitimate king? Who is really the king? And it's a bigger question than just who is king of the Jews, but who is king of kings? Who reigns supreme? Who is in charge? You guys know the story, and sometimes in church we get this story wrong because we normally take the wise men and put them there at the manger scene with baby Jesus, and that's really not very accurate. In fact, I used to collect, I do still collect manger scenes and all this. And my mom used to tell me when I was a little kid, I would take the wise men and put them somewhere else. I guess I was trying to be biblically accurate even as a little boy. I don't know. But they shouldn't be there, right? So these wise men come to Bethlehem, and Mary and Joseph and Jesus are no longer in the stable, no longer there in a barn, but they have found some kind of house. And so Jesus could be anywhere, right? We know from the next section that we'll look at next week, from a few months old to almost 2 years old. But these strange men from another land, we have here, it says wise men. What are wise men? Who are they? Well, the Greek word is magi. They were from which we get the word magician, but they weren't magicians. They weren't like David Copperfield standing up performing grand illusions over front of huge crowds. They were astrologers. They were political elites, royal advisors who had a lot of money. Most likely, as we want to know, where did they come from? They came from the east, probably from the area of Persia or Babylon. If you remember, that is the place where God's people were taken into captivity. Right? When God allowed the Babylonians to come in and destroy the nation of Judah and Jerusalem for their sin, they were carried off into captivity in Babylon. And they would have taken the scrolls, the ancient text, the Old Testament with them when they went. And so there would have been in that place and in that area scriptures that these wise men, these astrologers, these royal advisors would probably have had access to. And it was a big belief in the ancient Near East that when a new star was discovered, that it announced something special, that something grand has occurred, that a once-in-a-lifetime event has happened. And so through all of this, they interpret that a king of the Jews has been born. And so they travel from their land in the east, probably hundreds upon hundreds of miles, to come to Jerusalem, the capital city of Israel. But why is this important? Even if it's true, as we believe the Bible presents this as true, why did Matthew include it here? What does this matter to us, that these men from this other land, from this other place, came to worship Jesus? Well, why it's important is because it displays for us continually in this book God's global purpose. Right? If pagan astrologers traveled from a distant land to worship the King Jesus, he is more than a regional figure, but he is King of all the earth. And so these men come, and so they come to Jerusalem, and they come to the current king, King Herod, and they ask him, because I probably figured that it would have been one of Herod's sons, because that would have made sense. That's how kings happen, right? It was a line that was passed down. But Herod was not a legitimate king. Herod was a king installed by the Roman government. He was actually not even a Jew, although he said to have converted to Judaism. But he was installed by the Romans, and he was a paranoid person. Crazy paranoid. Overwhelmingly paranoid. And so this phrase that is used here by these magi that says, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews?" This is on the lips of pagan people. They believe he's the king. Now Matthew, in his book, this phrase, King of the Jews, will not be used again until when? All the way at the end of the book, when Pilate, another pagan ruler, asked Jesus, "Are you the King of the Jews?" And if you remember, it was nailed over the cross as a sign. Here is Jesus, King of the Jews. Each time, pagan people, non-believing people, people that did not understand the purpose and plans of God, announcing Jesus as King of the Jews while the Jewish people were fighting against it. So who was this Herod? He was installed as king by the Romans. Supposed convert to Judaism. He was a paranoid and ruthless leader. He actually killed numerous of his sons and wives because he thought that they were plotting to overthrow him. Right? So the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus said about Herod, he said, "I would rather be Herod's pig than his son." I mean, this is what the emperor said about Herod, right? I mean, this guy was crazy, and it'll make a lot more sense when we look at what happens next week, the great massacre of all of the children. But he was not a legitimate ruler according to genealogy. A few weeks ago, we looked at Matthew's genealogy, right? We looked at the line of David. Herod is not in there. He is not a legitimate king according to God. But he has been installed by a pagan nation. And he is paranoid that a real king, that a legitimate king has been born. And so we have this announcement of the star. And this is not just something that pops up out of the blue. Right? This is something that God has spoken about a long, long time ago. And you may want to flip there. You don't have to flip there, but all the way back in Numbers chapter 22, there's a story about the king of Moab. His name was Balak, right? And Balak saw all of these Israelites, all of these people of God coming because they were coming to the promised land that God was going to give them, right? And he was afraid, and all the people of Moab were afraid. Man, these people are going to wipe us out. They're going to take us down. And so Balak, the king of Moab, goes to a guy that you probably remember if you did some Old Testament children's stories by the name of Balaam. And you probably know Balaam because he had a donkey that spoke. Right? That is not the greatest thing about Balaam. We're going to look at a prophecy that we should know about Balaam that is much bigger than the fact that his donkey got mad at him and said, "Why are you hitting me?" So what happens is Balak hires Balaam. Balaam was some kind of pagan prophet, seer, and he wanted him to curse the people of God, the nation of Israel. Because it was known that the people that Balaam cursed were cursed, and the people that Balaam blessed were blessed. And so Balak hired Balaam to do this. But God warned Balaam not to curse his people. And that's why his donkey talked, right? Because on his way to go to Balak, there were all these numerous angels standing in the way, and the donkey could see it, but Balaam couldn't. And he was beating that donkey to go until God opened his eyes to see. So he comes and he does what God told him to do instead of what Balak told him to do. And instead of cursing the people of Israel, he blessed them. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Now this is all important because if we come to Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. So turn there. Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. This is what Balaam said. This is an oracle. This is a prophecy. God spoke through him. And he says, "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and it shall crush the forehead of Moab." So not only does Balaam not curse the people of Israel, but by the Spirit of God, he prophesies the coming of the Messiah. That one day, he said, "I see him, but not close." Right? I know he's coming, but he's not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter out of Israel. Now maybe these wise men had access to this scripture and they read that and they saw the star and they realized, man, something significant has happened. A king has been born, and they travel to go and to worship this king. But I want you to notice the last part of Numbers 24:17, and it says that he will crush the head of Moab, and Moab was the enemies of God. Go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, and what does God promise that the seed of the woman will do? But crush the head of the serpent, of Satan, the great tempter, our greatest enemy. So here is Jesus, the coming Messiah, the King of all kings, who won't just defeat one nation, but anyone, any enemy who stands between God and his people. Jesus is a legitimate king, born in the line of David, the promised Messiah, the king who would defeat the enemies of God's people. So we see the reign of the king. Jesus was the legitimate reigning king. Herod was the false, installed by a pagan nation king, not legitimate according to God's standard. Now I want you to see the role of the king. So I want you to flip with me to Isaiah chapter 60. We're doing a little bit of Bible drill this morning, but this is important. Isaiah chapter 60, verses 1 through 6. So it says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will be seen upon you. And nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes all around and see. They all gather together. They come to you. Your son shall come from afar, and your daughter shall be carried on the hip. They shall see and be radiant, and your heart shall thrill and exult, because the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you. The young camels of Midian and Ephah, and all those from Sheba shall come, and they shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall bring good news, the praises of the Lord." Now, hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus comes, this is in the Bible, folks. That specific. What would they bring? How would they travel? I guess we could legitimately say they rode on camels. Right? It doesn't say it in Matthew's account, but it does say here in Isaiah's account they came on camels, right? The wealth of the nations would come. The people would come to worship the light that has come into the darkness. And they would bring him gifts of gold and frankincense. So the first thing we see here is the role of the king is Jesus is to be the light to the nations. God's global purpose. He hasn't just come to set free a people, but all people who would trust and believe in him, who would worship him as he deserves to be worshiped. But then the second thing that I want you to see, flip back to Matthew chapter 2. And so as the wise men come, or the Magi come to present themselves before Herod, they ask, where is this King of the Jews to be born? If he's not here in Jerusalem, where is he? Right? And so Herod goes to all his scholars. He should have known, right? If he was a real convert to Judaism, he should have known this passage of Scripture, but he doesn't. But he goes to his scribes and his Pharisees, his people, his chief priests, and he asks them, where is the Messiah? So he knows. He knows that there's a prophecy. He knows that there is a king that is coming. He says, where is he to be born? And they told him, Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who shall shepherd my people Israel. Now Matthew kind of combines two scriptures into one here. The last part of that, who will shepherd my people Israel, doesn't come from the book of Micah. It actually comes from 2 Samuel 5:2, where it talks about David, who was the shepherd. Right? So I'm going to read this to you. This all pulls together. This is really cool. In times past, when Saul was king over us, it was you who led out and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to you, you shall be the shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over Israel. So if you remember in this Old Testament, if you go back and look in 1 and 2 Samuel, and you look at what happened, right? God has brought his people into the promised land, and they want a king. Right? They want to be like all the other nations. We want a king. So God says, I'll give you a king. And he gave them a king. Right? King Saul, who looked like a king. He looked like he was supposed to be in charge. He was head and shoulders above everybody else. He was handsome. He was strong. He was all of these things, except he did not love God. And so when he disobeyed God, when he broke God, the Spirit of God was taken from him, and Samuel the prophet went and anointed who as king? David. the little runt shepherd boy, whose daddy didn't even think it important enough to invite him to the meal. He just left him out there with the sheep. He was a shepherd. And Samuel said, listen, you got to have another son, right? Because none of these guys are good enough. None of these guys are what I'm looking for, because man looks at the outward appearance, but what God looks at what? The heart. And so David is anointed king, though Saul is still the king. David is anointed king. And so we see this contrast, this working between the illegitimate king and the king that is the real king of God. And so this is even heightened even more in the battle against Goliath, right? So we have the supposed king, Saul, who's over here afraid, who won't go fight. And we have David, the little runny shepherd boy, who goes, God will beat him. And he goes out there with a slingshot and he kills the giant and cuts off his head. And the little runt shepherd boy is the unlikely hero. Come to the New Testament. Herod lives in Jerusalem. Herod has a palace. Herod has all the wealth. He has all the trappings of what looks like should be a king, except that he is not the legitimate king. Jesus was born in a stable to peasant mom and dad, but he was the real king, the unlikely hero who would defeat the giant of sin and death and hell for us. Right? So the role of the king, Jesus was to be the light to the nations, but he was to be the shepherd of his people. And what does Jesus say over and over in the book of John? Right? He says, I am the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. Right? He says, I'm the gate that allows the sheep to go in and out and find pasture. Jesus says, this is me. I have come to be the shepherd, as it was prophesied so long ago. So we've seen the reign of the king and the role of the king, but now I want you to see the response to the king. We have here three main groups of people. Herod, the fearful, desperate, illegitimate king who goes on a murderous rage because he is so threatened by this little baby that has been born. Herod doesn't want anybody or anyone to threaten his life, his kingdom, his power, his throne. And he will do anything, and he will crush anyone who tries to get in his way. That is his response to the coming of the Messiah. He didn't know. He surely knew that a Messiah was coming, but he didn't care. He didn't care what God's plans were. He cared what his plans were. He wanted to be in control. And so his response was to eliminate the Messiah. And then we see the religious leaders. You would think if some people came and said, hey, we've seen a star, the Messiah might have been born. If these people really believed that a Messiah was coming and they knew the Scriptures and they knew all of the prophecies of God and they knew where he would be born, that they would take the time to walk the 6 miles from Jerusalem to Bethlehem to see if there was actually somebody there. But they didn't. The response of the religious leaders was indifference. It was basically, we don't care. So you wonder if they ever really believed it. And so I want you to see this morning that it is possible for you to know and to have memorized all of this book and miss the whole point for which it was written. They knew the Messiah was coming. They knew the place that he would be born, but they missed Jesus. And then we see the Magi, the wise men from a pagan land. They traveled a long and uncomfortable journey, and they brought extravagant gifts. And they worshiped the king. Listen to verse 9 and following. It says, and after they listening to the king, they went on their way. Behold, the star they had seen when it arose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Three times in this text, these 12 verses, the word worship is mentioned. The first time when they come and they come to Herod and they say, "Where is this King of the Jews who has been born? We have come to worship him." And then Herod, lying to them, says, "Hey, when you find him, you come back and tell me because I want to worship him too." And then we see these wise men actually falling down before a baby and worshiping him. Folks, I don't think this was normal in their day to worship a child. But there was something different about Jesus. He was the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and though God chose to enter into our world wrapped in flesh, placed in a womb, and born in a barn, He is still worthy of worship and praise and honor and glory and everything you and I have. And even though all of these people who should have known, they were so close. I mean, Bethlehem was 6 miles away. Now, you might not want to walk 6 miles, but these people walked all the time, everywhere they went. 6 miles was nothing. And they wouldn't even go. They wouldn't even go see if he was there. I mean, think about this. Herod wouldn't even waste the time to go himself to see if the child was there. He just says, "You guys go and report." 6 miles away. They were so close to the promise of God, to the Savior, to the Messiah, but they missed it. But these pagan astrologers who has traveled hundreds upon hundreds of miles at great personal cost, they came and they worshiped him. They had no real reason to do it. No real reason. I mean, I don't even know, other than the plan and purpose of God, why they were there. But yet they believed. And they worshiped. And they brought their gifts before him. And what gifts did they bring? They brought gold, which represents royalty. This would have been a common gift that would have been presented to kings. And so, as giving him gold, the most valuable metal, precious thing that there was, they were saying, "You are the king." They brought frankincense, which was used in the temple in the worship of God. Now, I don't know that they knew what they were doing, but God knew what they were doing. And so they brought this thing that was used to worship God and they placed it before Jesus. Why? Because he's God in the flesh. And then myrrh was often used as a burial spice for the burying of bodies. And so they brought this myrrh and they set it before Jesus, recognizing that he was a man, recognizing that he would die. Now, I don't know, and they probably had no idea that he would die for the sins of the world. But God knew. And each one of these gifts tells a story about who he was. He's the king, and he is worthy. He is God who has come to us, but he is a man who would go to the cross and pay the penalty for our sin. What will you do with King Jesus this morning? Will you submit and surrender your life to him and worship him as he truly deserves? Will you consider him a threat that must be eliminated and removed? Or will your response just simply be indifference? I'm close enough. You know, I come to church, I sing these songs, I put a little money in the offering plate. That should be good enough, preacher. And miss the whole point of why he came. He came to save you and to set you free. What will you do with King Jesus this morning? Let's pray.